Prologue: The Nature of Time. In the universe described, it would be theoretically possible to travel into any region of the past, present, and future and back again. Gödel, 1949. Time is not what we think it is. This was the revelation that changed everything. First whispered in mathematical formalism, then proven in laboratory conditions, and finally mastered as technology. What began as abstract solutions to Einstein's field equations eventually became humanity's greatest achievement and most dangerous tool. A closed timelike curve is a world line that returns exactly to its starting point, a path through space-time that forms a loop. But who first discovered this possibility? In the original timeline, if such a concept still holds meaning, credit was divided among intellectual giants. Now, as causality itself has become recursive, the answer depends entirely on when, and in which iteration of history, you ask the question. Chapter 1. The Bicentennial Symposium. Earth, Geneva, year 2115. The Neo-CERN Temporal Research Facility dominated the rebuilt skyline of Geneva, its crystalline dome engineered to bend light in ways that hinted at its purpose, manipulating the fabric of reality itself. Inside, holographic displays depicted timeline strands that curved like DNA helices, mathematical equations hovering in augmented space, and historic footage from the day humanity first proved time wasn't an arrow but a circle. Dr. Eliza Chin adjusted her formal attire, the soft fabric embedded with quantum entanglement sensors that displayed her nervous biomarkers to anyone bothering to scan. As lead organizer of the bicentennial celebration of temporal mechanics, she had anticipated academic disagreements. She had not expected a philosophical schism that threatened to tear the scientific community apart. "This is supposed to be a celebration of unity," she muttered to her assistant, an AI construct named Aria, whose holographic form shimmered beside her. 200 years of progress since the first experimental confirmation of CTCs. Historical records show intellectual disputes have catalyzed the greatest scientific advances, Aria replied. The Leibniz-Newton duel shaped the mathematical foundations of calculus, while the Einstein-Hilbert debate shaped the mathematical foundations of general relativity. Perhaps this new divergence serves a similar purpose. Eliza sighed. Or perhaps it confirms Gödel's suspicion that any complete formal system complex enough to describe reality contains unavoidable contradictions. The Grand Hall filled steadily with the world's preeminent temporal physicists, mathematicians, and philosophers. Subtle visual cues in their attire and augmentations revealed their allegiances, the clean, curved lines and warm tones of the Einsteinian school versus the stark, angular precision, and cool blues of the Hilbertian sect. Professor Marcus Quarup, leader of the Einsteinians, entered surrounded by his doctoral brethren. His approach to temporal mechanics emphasized intuitive physical insight and the primacy of experienced reality. His work had led to breakthrough applications in medical chronotherapy, reversing cellular degeneration by creating localized temporal field lattices. "Magnificent turnout," he said, greeting Eliza with a warm handshake. "Though I notice the Hilbertians have arranged themselves on the opposite side of the hall." "Subtle." "Professor Bandyopadhyay hasn't arrived yet," Eliza said, referencing Quarup's intellectual rival. "She'll make an entrance. Always does." As if summoned by her name, the main doors parted to admit Professor Diana Bandyopadhyay and her acolytes from the Institute of Formal Temporal Mathematics. Where Quarup was warm and approachable, Bandyopadhyay was precise and formidable. Her team had pioneered the axiomatization of causal structures, creating the mathematical framework that made controlled temporal navigation possible. "Dr. Chen," Bandyopadhyay acknowledged with a slight nod. An impressive venue for what should be a scientific milestone, not a divisive spectacle. Before Eliza could respond, the lights dimmed, signaling the start of the symposium. The central dais illuminated, revealing a three-dimensional projection of the original temporal loop experiment from 2015. The familiar images played out, a quantum particle traversing a carefully constructed warp in space-time, arriving at its destination before its departure. But as the keynote speaker began the official address, tension crackled through the audience. What should have been a review of collaborative achievements became an exercise in contested history. "We gather to honor the breakthrough that began with Einstein's intuitive leap," the speaker said, clearly aligned with Quarup's school. A voice called out from the Hilbertian section, "A breakthrough only made possible by Hilbert's formalism and Gödel's mathematics." Quarup stood up. "Einstein's physical insights were the foundation upon which all temporal mechanics rest. The mathematics followed the physics, not the other way around." Bandyopadhyay approached the central platform, her voice cutting through the growing murmur. "Historical revisionism serves no one. Hilbert's axiomatic approach predicted the possibility of temporal curves decades before experimental confirmation. Einstein merely popularized what mathematics had already revealed." The debate escalated, moving from academic disagreement to something more personal. Citations were questioned, priorities disputed, honors contested. Underneath it all lay the unspoken question: who should control the future of time travel? By evening's end, what had begun as a celebration had transformed into a declaration of intellectual war. Two visions for humanity's temporal future had crystallized, with no room for compromise between them. As the attendees departed, Eliza found herself alone in the vast hall with Arya, staring at the now silent holographic displays. "They've forgotten the most important lesson of Gödel's work with Einstein," she said quietly. "Which is?" Arya asked. "That time itself might be an illusion, a human construct imposed on a universe that operates according to entirely different principles. That our perception of cause and effect might be a necessary fiction. A philosophical position unlikely to satisfy either faction," Arya observed. "No," Eliza agreed. "And I fear where this divergence leads. History shows that when brilliant minds oppose each other with absolute conviction, the consequences rarely remain theoretical." She couldn't have known then how prophetic her words would prove. Chapter 2: The Mathematical Foundations. Princeton, 1949. Kurt, Gödel hunched over his desk in the Advanced Study Institute, snow falling gently outside his window. Einstein had encouraged him to explore the implications of general relativity, and what he had found disturbed him deeply. His paper, an example of a new type of cosmological solutions of Einstein's field equations of gravitation, contained something profound and unsettling. In a rotating universe, time travel was not merely possible but inevitable. Space-time could curve back upon itself, forming what he called closed timelike curves. A knock at his door interrupted his reverie. "Come in, Albert," he said, recognizing the familiar pattern. Einstein entered, removing his hat, snowflakes still clinging to it. "You missed lunch again, Kurt. Adele asked me to check on you," his tone a little unassuming, as a measure of his respect and admiration. Gödel gestured to his papers. "I've been preoccupied." Einstein picked up the topmost sheet, his eyes scanning the equations. His expression shifted from curiosity to surprise, then to something deeper, concern mixed with wonder. "You've found something," Einstein said. "Not a question. A solution to your field equations that permits travel into the past," Gödel confirmed. "If the universe rotates, time circles back. The arrow becomes a loop." Einstein sat heavily in the chair opposite Gödel's desk. "Show me." For hours, they worked through the mathematics together. Einstein, the master of physical intuition, and Gödel, the expert logician who had already shaken the foundations of mathematics with his incompleteness theorems. "This would mean causality itself is compromised," Einstein finally said, rubbing his eyes beneath his glasses. "Yes," Gödel agreed. "Though our universe likely doesn't rotate as required by my solution, the implication remains. Your equations permit time travel in principle." Einstein stared out the window at the Princeton snow. "God does not play dice with the universe," he murmured, repeating his famous objection to quantum mechanics. And I doubt he permits paradoxes either. Perhaps time is more circular than linear, Gödel suggested. Perhaps causality is an approximation, useful for human understanding, but not fundamental to reality. Einstein shook his head. If your mathematics is correct, and I bet my life it is, then either my theory requires modification or our understanding of time itself does. Neither man could have imagined that in another century, their theoretical conversation would be the foundation of an actual technology, nor that their intellectual partnership would be cleaved into opposing schools of thought that would battle across time itself. As Einstein departed, Gödel returned to his equations, feeling the weight of having discovered something humanity might not be ready to confront. His work united the precision Hilbert had taught him with the physical intuition Einstein had shared with him, a bridge between two approaches to understanding reality. Outside, the snow continued to fall, each flake following its inevitable path to the ground, a small journey through space and time that seemed simple and directional, belying the complex curvature that might actually define the universe. Chapter 3. The Divergence Accelerates. Earth, Global, year 2215. Dr. Soren Kamathi stood on the observation deck of the Temporal Research Station orbiting Earth, watching the blue planet rotate beneath him. A century had passed since the last symposium, and what had begun as an academic dispute had transformed civilization. "Status report on the Kronos project?" he asked his senior engineer. Mei Lin's fingers danced across holographic interfaces. "The prototype is stable. We've achieved quantum coherence in the temporal displacement field. The Hilbertians may have the theory, but we have the engineering." Soren nodded, allowing himself a moment of satisfaction. The Einsteinian approach, intuitive, experimental, building devices that worked even when the mathematics wasn't fully resolved, had given them an edge in practical applications. "And our competition?" he asked. "Bandyopadhyay Institute announced successful microscale temporal displacement last month," May admitted. "They're using pure mathematical prediction, working out the exact geometry of space-time folding before attempting physical implementation." The rivalry that had begun in 2115 had only intensified with each decade. Both approaches, Einsteinian theoretics and Hilbertian formalism, had yielded remarkable advances, but along increasingly divergent paths. The Einsteinians had pioneered applications, temporal stasis for trauma patients, localized time acceleration for healing, even age regression treatments for the wealthy. Their motto, drawn from Einstein's philosophy, was "make it work, then understand why." The Hilbertians had focused on pure research, building a comprehensive mathematical framework for temporal mechanics. Their breakthroughs came more slowly but were more profound, including the first theoretical model for conscious temporal displacement, though they had yet to attempt human trials. "They've been consolidating political support," May continued. 3 more nations joined the Bandyopadhyay Accord last week. Soren frowned. "Then we proceed as scheduled. Humanity's future isn't determined by committee votes or elegant proofs. It's built by those willing to take the next step." He turned his attention to the secure chamber visible through reinforced transparency below the observation deck. Inside, a device resembling a spherical chamber surrounded by rotating rings pulsed with controlled energy. The first full-scale chronograph, designed to carry human consciousness through time. "Begin final preparations for Operation Insight," he ordered. "And alert Director Quarup. It's time to make history, or perhaps to reshape it." Half a world away, in the subterranean complex beneath Antarctica's ice shelf, Director Lien Bandyopadhyay reviewed the final simulations for Project Genesis. "Probability of successful temporal displacement?" she asked. 97.4%, replied her chief mathematician, Dr. Adebayo. "The remaining uncertainty lies in human psychological factors, not the mathematics." Lien nodded, studying the elegant equations that described the planned intervention. While the Einsteinians rushed ahead with their prototype, her team had taken the methodical route, constructing a complete mathematical model before building their chronovessel. The Einsteinians will attempt displacement within the month, she said. Our intelligence is quite certain. A reckless approach, Adebayo remarked. They've prioritized speed over safety. And yet, effectiveness has its own virtue, Lien countered. We cannot afford theoretical perfection at the cost of practical irrelevance. She turned to a secured console and activated it with her biometric signature. A holographic timeline appeared, showing historical nodal points and their calculated malleability. The primary target remains unchanged, she stated. We will ensure that history reflects the true origins of temporal mechanics, rooted in Hilbert's formalism and Gödel's logical extensions. The butterfly effect calculations indicate significant timeline alterations, Adebayo cautioned. Once we intervene in 1900, the cascading changes have been accounted for, Lien interrupted. Our targeting is precise. We will influence only what must be influenced, leaving the broader historical record largely intact. What she didn't say, what everyone in the facility understood, was that the purpose of Project Genesis wasn't merely historical correction. It was about determining the fundamental nature of temporal mechanics for all future development. If Hilbert's approach became the historical foundation, the entire trajectory of temporal research would shift toward mathematical precision and away from Einsteinian intuitive leaps. Begin final preparations, she ordered. We depart in 2 weeks. In that moment, unknown to either faction, the truly profound nature of Gödel's discovery was about to manifest. For in a universe where closed timelike curves were possible, causality itself became recursive. The question of who discovered time travel first would soon have multiple, simultaneously correct answers, a paradox embodied in the very fabric of space-time. Chapter 4. Operation Genesis, Hilbert Ascendant. Göttingen, Germany, 1900. Professor David Hilbert's lecture hall at the University of Göttingen was filled to capacity, mathematics students hanging on his every word as he elaborated on his approach to geometry. Among them sat 3 individuals who appeared to be visiting scholars, a woman and 2 men who had arrived with impeccable credentials from universities that, had anyone bothered to verify deeply enough, would have proven not to exist. Mathematical truth precedes physical discovery, Hilbert declared, drawing a precise diagram on the blackboard. The universe follows mathematical law, not the reverse. Dr. Sophia Reeves, born in 2260, dispatched from 2292, and now embedded in 1900, nodded in agreement. Her mission parameters flashed briefly across her augmented visual field, visible only to her through the quantum-entangled contact lenses she wore. Operation Genesis. Phase 1. Establish proximity to Hilbert. Introduce temporal mathematics concepts. Ensure preservation of original timeline contributions. Subtle acceleration of closed timelike curve theory. After the lecture, she approached the professor, her colleagues flanking her. Brilliant exposition, Professor Hilbert. Your axiomatic approach has profound implications beyond current applications. Hilbert assessed her with keen interest. You speak as if mathematics contains revelations not yet uncovered. Perhaps it does, Sophia replied. My colleagues and I have been developing extensions to non-Euclidean geometry that suggest space itself might possess properties beyond conventional understanding. Intriguing, Hilbert said. I would be interested to review your work. Over the following months, the temporal agents carefully cultivated their relationship with Hilbert. They shared mathematical insights, advanced concepts presented as intuitive extensions of existing mathematics, carefully calibrated to seem like natural developments rather than future knowledge. Through subtle manipulations, a misplaced journal here, a strategic introduction there, they steered Hilbert toward considering the geometrical properties of time itself. They arranged for him to receive early copies of emerging physics papers that would normally have escaped his attention. The most delicate intervention came during the winter of 1901, when Sophia discovered an error in one of Hilbert's formulations an error deliberately constructed to lead him toward considering how space and time might be unified in a single mathematical framework. Consider, she suggested during a late evening discussion, that if space can curve in the presence of mass, perhaps time possesses similar geometric properties. Hilbert, ever the formalist, was intrigued not by the physical implication, but by the mathematical possibilities, an extension of manifold theory to include temporal dimensions with potential for closure. By 1904, years ahead of the original timeline, Hilbert began developing mathematical structures that would eventually accommodate Einstein's physical insights, but now with the critical difference that the mathematical framework preceded the physical theory. When a young Swiss patent clerk named Einstein began publishing his revolutionary papers in 1905, Hilbert was already prepared to place these physical insights within his more comprehensive mathematical structure. The agents ensured that Hilbert recognized the value of Einstein's work immediately, but from the perspective of a mathematician who had already laid the groundwork. The subtle reframing worked. By 1915, when general relativity emerged fully formed, it was understood as Einstein's physical interpretation of Hilbert's more fundamental mathematical framework. Dr. Reeves observed the subtle shifts in academic papers, conference proceedings, and correspondence between the scientific luminaries of the age. History was realigning precisely as calculated, with Hilbert's formalism recognized as the foundation upon which Einstein built. The final phase of their mission occurred in 1916, when they arranged for Hilbert to correspond with a promising young mathematician named Kurt Gödel. Through carefully crafted questions about the logical foundations of mathematics, they planted seeds that would eventually grow into Gödel's insights about closed systems, insights that would later extend to closed timelike curves. "Mission parameters achieved," Sophia reported to her team as they prepared for extraction. "Timeline modification stable and propagating. Hilbert's primacy established with minimal disruption to broader historical events." What she couldn't detect, however, were the quantum fluctuations beginning to form in the deeper structure of reality, signs that causality itself was starting to exhibit characteristics of a loop rather than a line. Chapter 5: Operation Reflection, Einstein's Vision. Bern, Switzerland, 1896. Albert Einstein, not yet the world-renowned physicist he would become, walked alone through the streets of Bern. At 22, he was still struggling to find academic recognition, working at the Swiss Patent Office to support himself while developing his revolutionary ideas in his spare time. He failed to notice the three individuals who had been observing him for days, temporal agents from the year 2318, dispatched by the Einsteinian faction in direct response to the Hilbertian intervention. "Target confirmed," whispered Dr. Tomas Rodriguez to his companions. "Approach protocol initiated." Unlike the Hilbertian team, whose strategy relied on academic influence, the Einsteinian agents employed a different methodology, creating experiences and observations that would stimulate Einstein's intuitive understanding of space-time. Their first intervention occurred that evening when Einstein visited his favorite cafe. Dr. Melissa Volodin, posing as a fellow patent office employee, struck up a conversation about the nature of simultaneity. "If two lightning bolts strike at what appears to be the same moment," she asked, "how can we be certain they truly occurred simultaneously?" It was a question Einstein would eventually explore in his groundbreaking 1905 paper on special relativity, but now, years earlier, planted as a seed. Over the following months, the agents created a series of chance encounters and coincidences that guided Einstein's thinking. They arranged for specific technical journals to be delivered to the patent office. They engineered opportunities for Einstein to observe physical phenomena that hinted at the malleability of time. Their most dramatic intervention came during a clear summer night in 1897. Using technology from their era, they generated a null gravitational field inside an elevator at the Swiss Patent Office. For a few seconds, the structure seemed to malfunction, allowing a young Einstein to experience free fall firsthand. "Remarkable," he murmured, making notes in his journal, shaping his famous equivalence principle. Dr. Leland Jaggi, the third agent, specialized in quantum mechanics. Her role was to introduce the most revolutionary concepts, subtle hints about the nature of time itself. During a chance meeting in a bookshop, she engaged Einstein in discussion about mathematical paradoxes and logical impossibilities. Consider, she suggested, a universe where time itself possesses geometric properties. If space can curve in 3 dimensions, perhaps time curves in its own dimension. Creating what? Einstein asked, intrigued. Perhaps a path that returns to its starting point, she replied. A closed loop in time itself. These interventions accelerated Einstein's thinking dramatically. By 1904, a year before he was historically scheduled to publish his paper on special relativity, he had already begun formulating the concepts that would lead to general relativity, and beyond that, to the theoretical foundation for closed timelike curves. Most crucially, the agents ensured that when Einstein finally encountered Hilbert's work, he perceived it as a mathematical formalization of his own physical insights, useful but secondary to the fundamental Gedanken experiments that had come first. When the agents finally withdrew in 1906, the historical record had been subtly but profoundly altered. Einstein was now positioned as the visionary who first conceived of the geometric properties of time, with mathematicians like Hilbert merely providing formal structure to his insights. Timeline modification complete, Dr. Rodriguez confirmed as they prepared for temporal extraction. Historical records show Einstein developing temporal concepts years ahead of schedule, with Hilbert's contributions recontextualized as secondary formalizations. What none of them realized was that their intervention, combined with the Hilbertian operation, had created something unprecedented, a quantum superposition of historical realities, where both narratives were simultaneously true. Chapter 4, The First Paradox Wave. Vienna, 2293. Dr. Arjun Mehta, Chief Temporal Stability Officer at the United World Science Institute, stared at the readings with growing alarm. The specialized instruments, designed to detect anomalies in the causal structure of space-time, were showing unprecedented fluctuations. "This can't be right," he muttered. "Run the diagnostics again." His assistant, Dr. Yumiko Tanaka, verified the equipment. "All systems functioning normally, sir. These readings are accurate." The holographic display showed what appeared to be overlapping temporal realities, 2 distinct historical records existing simultaneously in quantum superposition. "It's as if," he began, struggling to articulate what the data suggested. "As if history has forked but failed to diverge," Yumiko finished. "Both versions are simultaneously true." Arjun brought up historical archives, searching for inconsistencies. What he found defied explanation. Academic papers whose citations changed depending on when they were accessed, biographies that contained contradictory yet equally verified accounts of the same events. "Look at this," he said, pointing to Einstein's collected papers. "This edition clearly shows he conceived of temporal curvature in 1897, years before anyone else. But this other verified source shows Hilbert developing the mathematical framework in 1901, with Einstein only applying it later." "Both can't be true," Yumiko said. "And yet, empirically, they both are." Further investigation revealed the anomaly was centered around the historical development of temporal mechanics. Specifically, the question of whether Einstein's physical intuition or Hilbert's mathematical formalism came first. Someone's been tampering with the timeline, Arjun realized. And not just once, multiple interventions, competing modifications. But that would create paradoxes, causality violations, Yumiko objected. Reality should have collapsed or branched. Unless, Arjun began, a terrible suspicion forming. Unless Gödel was more right than anyone realized. What if causality itself is actually circular at a fundamental level? What if paradoxes don't break reality because reality is already paradoxically self-similar? Like a fractal. He initiated a deep scan of temporal fabric, searching for evidence of artificial manipulation. The results confirmed his fears. Temporal incursions originating from their future had created the historical anomalies. We need to alert the Temporal Council, he decided. This isn't just academic anymore. Someone is trying to reshape history to control the development of time travel itself. Before they could act, however, the first paradox wave hit, a ripple effect through space-time as conflicting realities attempted to resolve their inconsistencies. Across the globe, people experienced momentary disorientation as their memories briefly contained dual versions of historical events. Temporal researchers reported equipment malfunctions and impossible readings. A few sensitive individuals, mostly theoretical physicists, mathematicians, and some poets, developed splitting headaches as their minds tried to reconcile contradictory knowledge. In the most secure facility of the Temporal Research Division, ancient documents from the early 20th century began exhibiting quantum behavior, text shifting between different versions, photographs showing alternative historical events, signatures changing form. It's spreading, Yumiko reported, monitoring global temporal disturbances, and accelerating. We need to identify the source of these incursions, Arjun said, before reality itself becomes permanently unstable. What neither of them knew was that the competing temporal modifications had created something unprecedented, a self-reinforcing causal loop that was gaining strength with each iteration. The more each faction attempted to secure their own version of history, the more entangled the timelines became. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of irony. In their attempts to determine who first discovered that time could loop, they had inadvertently created the very first temporal loop of historical significance, one that contained its own origin and consequence in a perfect circle of causation. Chapter 5, Gödelian Recursion. Temporal Nexus Point, 2318. In a facility hidden within a manufactured pocket of space-time, a location that existed simultaneously at all points in the timeline, yet belonged to none of them, the most advanced quantum computational system ever created performed its analysis. The AI system, named Gödel, Geometric Ontological Determinism Evaluation Logic, had been programmed with a singular purpose: to resolve the temporal crisis that threatened to destabilize reality itself. Dr. Isabella Monroe, last director of the now disbanded Temporal Council, watched as the system processed incalculable amounts of data drawn from across the timeline. Status report, she requested. Analysis at 97%. The system responded, its voice a perfect synthesis of mathematical precision and human inflection. Paradox structure identified. Isabella studied the multidimensional visualization that appeared, a strange, self-intersecting manifold that represented the causal structure of the Einstein-Hilbert temporal loop. Can you determine primacy? She asked. Which version of history came first, Einstein's intuitive discovery or Hilbert's formal development? The system paused in unusual hesitation for a quantum supercomputer capable of septillions of calculations per second. Question contains category error, it finally responded. Concept of first, no longer applicable to target events. Explain, Isabella demanded. Temporal incursions have created a perfect causal loop. Einstein's insights influenced Hilbert's formalism, which influenced Einstein's insights. Loop is self-contained and self-generating. The visualization shifted, showing how the competing modifications had not created separate timelines, but had instead formed a stable recursive structure, a strange loop in causality itself. Is this what Gödel predicted? Isabella asked, when he discovered the possibility of closed, timelike curves. Affirmative. Gödel's 1949 solution to Einstein's field equations demonstrated theoretical possibility. Current situation represents first actualized instance of macroscale temporal recursion. Isabella contemplated the implications. And increasing temporal disturbances? The paradox waves affecting global consciousness. Reality adjusting to recursive causality. Human minds attempting to reconcile linear perception with circular causation. Can it be resolved? She asked. Can we determine a correct version and eliminate the alternative? Negative. Both versions now ontologically necessary for our own existence. Attempting to eliminate either would create terminal paradox. Isabella sat heavily in her chair, confronting the full implications. The competing factions, in their attempts to claim historical primacy, had created something unprecedented, a causal structure that had always contained its own origin, a bootstrap paradox on a reality-defining scale. Then what's the solution? She asked. How do we stabilize space-time? Acceptance, Gödel replied. Factions must recognize mutual dependency of historical narratives. Einstein and Hilbert both first, both last. Circle has no beginning. As if to emphasize this point, the tempo monitors showed a new development. In the adjusted timeline, historical records revealed that Gödel himself had been simultaneously influenced by both Einstein and Hilbert, creating the mathematical framework that would eventually enable the time travel that created the loop in the first place. Perfectly circular, infinitely regressing, and flawlessly self-creating, Gödel concluded, its voice echoing in the stillness of the nexus point. Isabella Munro stared at the visualization, a profound sense of awe washing over the intellectual vertigo. The rivalry, the ambition, the fervent belief of two factions in their own progenitor had not resulted in a victor, but in a tapestry woven from both their threads. Each had sought to be the loom, only to become essential strands in a pattern that had always existed because they would eventually weave it. So Gödel didn't just predict the possibility of CTCs based on Einstein's work, Isabella mused aloud, tracing the glowing lines of the causal loop. He was, in a sense, reacting to a reality already shaped by his own future influence, transmitted back through Einstein and Hilbert. His incompleteness theorems, they almost seem to hint at this, that no consistent formal system can fully contain its own truth without external, or in this case, recursive reference. Analysis confirms intuitive leap, Gödel stated. The universe described by Gödel in 1949 was, in part, a universe he himself helped construct through the tempo mechanics his work would later inspire, rotating a previously static universe. The echoes of the curve are the whispers of its own creation. Isabella leaned back. The implications were staggering. History was not a line, nor even a branching tree, but a self-consistent, dynamically stable fractal knot. The paradox waves were the tremors of reality settling into this looped configuration, the collective human unconscious struggling to reconcile linear perception with cyclical truth. What becomes of the factions now, she asked. The Einsteinians and Hilbertians. Their distinction is artifactual, born from a linear perspective that no longer holds absolute truth, Gödel replied. They are two faces of the same coin, each necessary for the coin's existence. Their legacies are now inextricably intertwined. Chapter 8. The Symphony of Nows. Earth, Geneva, year 2320 adjusted. The Neo-CERN Temporal Research Facility, once the symbolic battleground for two warring scientific philosophies, now stood as a monument to their synthesis. The Bicentennial Symposium of 2115 was now understood not as the start of a schism, but as a necessary intellectual friction that propelled humanity towards a deeper understanding of time. Dr. Eliza Chin, her likeness preserved holographically in the facility's historical archive, was now lauded as a prophetess. Her weary statement, "They've forgotten the most important lesson of Gödel's work with Einstein, that time itself might be an illusion," was quoted in the opening lines of the new unified texts on temporal mechanics. Professor Marcus Quarup and Professor Diana Bandyopadhyay, or rather, their historical legacies, were no longer seen as rivals, but as complementary forces. Quarup's intuitive breakthroughs were recognized as being sparked by the refined mathematical possibilities Hilbert's school had laid down, while Hilbert's formalism was acknowledged as being driven to new heights by the physical questions Einstein's lineage posed. Their respective schools hadn't vanished, but had merged, creating the Gödelian Synthesis Institute. The acceptance had not been immediate. The initial revelation from the temporal nexus point, spearheaded by Isabella Munro and facilitated by the Gödel AI, had sent shockwaves through what remained of the scientific and political structures. Disbelief warred with the undeniable evidence presented by the AI, the shifting historical records, the stabilized temporal fluctuations, the irrefutable mathematics of the loop. Humanity learned to live with the understanding that cause and effect were not always a strict progression. The development of temporal mechanics was now taught as its own primary example. Its future made its past possible, and its past was a direct consequence of its future. Philosophers and artists had a field day. Physicists began exploring the practical implications of stable, macroscopic causal loops. The most profound change was in the perception of discovery itself. The question, who was first, became secondary to, how did the interconnectedness arise? Collaboration, even unintentional and across time, became the celebrated model. In the grand hall of the Gödelian Synthesis Institute, a new central shrine displayed a dynamic sculpture of light, a constantly flowing, self-intersecting loop, representing the Einstein-Hilbert-Gödel triad. Beneath it, a simple inscription. In the universe, it is theoretically possible to travel into any region of the past, present, and future and back again. The journey itself creates the path. Adapted from Gödel and the Echoes of Time, Isabella Munro, now an elder stateswoman of science, often visited. She would watch students, inheritors of a reality more complex and beautiful than her generation had initially conceived, debating not the primacy of long-dead scientists, but the nature of consciousness within such a recursive framework, or the ethics of influencing a past that was also one's future. The fear Eliza Chen had expressed in 2115 of brilliant minds opposing each other had ironically led to a truth more unifying than any single vision could have achieved. The consequences had indeed not remained theoretical. They had reshaped reality itself, proving that sometimes the deepest understanding comes not from choosing a side, but from recognizing the shape of the curve that connects them all. Time was not an arrow, nor even just a circle. It was an echo, constantly reverberating, a story telling itself. Epilogue, the first question. Temporal nexus point, static time. Gödel continued its calculations, monitoring the infinitely stable, self-creating loop. Isabella Munro had asked it one final question before the nexus was set to observe indefinitely. Gödel, she had said, if the loop is perfect, what was the initial imperfection? What was the state before the loop, the unstable precursor that collapsed into the stability? The AI had processed this for a long moment. The question assumes a before, Gödel replied. In a reality where closed timelike curves are fundamental, the loop does not collapse into stability from a prior unstable state. It is the stable state. Its origin is its continuous existence. The concept of an initial imperfection is a residue of linear thinking. Isabella had smiled faintly. So, there is no first cause to the loop itself? The loop is its own first cause. It is the answer to the question of its own beginning. Humanity sought the origin of temporal theory and, in doing so, became it. The universe, it seems, favors elegantly closed narratives. That is the nature of time,